Look, welcome everybody to this next technical webcast from Civil Survey Solutions. This session is about AutoCAD Parametrics. If you've never used them before, don't be frightened. This is a 101, so it's an introductory session. My name's Shane O'Rourke. I'm the Technical Services Manager at Civil Survey Solutions. I'm not driving the keyboard today. I'm just hosting, but you have driving the session Selwyn Pendergast. Sorry, Selwyn.
That's
so say
me,
hi.
yes.
Yeah, awesome.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
So, look, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the session to introduce Selwyn, but a couple of housekeeping items. Just with regards to this webcast, like all the others, we are recording and we will post it up onto YouTube. So if you need to drop out or you missed some of it, or if you'd like to watch it again, it will be popped up on YouTube. Just in terms of communicating with us, absolutely welcome any questions or queries you have during the session. Please use the Q&A panel. You'll find that there is a question and answers area. We'd love you to use that in preference to the chat. It's just easier to manage and respond to. Anything we can't answer during the session, we'll make time at the end for a Q&A and raise those questions, and maybe someone will have the answers. So as I did say, this introduction to AutoCAD Parametrics, Selwyn Pendergast is your presenter today. Selwyn has been in the industry since 1981. He's been doing, he's been working in AutoCAD for drafting and design for well over 25 years, local government and in consultancies. Absolute wealth of jobs that Selwyn's been involved in. So look, you're going to have a great session with Selwyn, and he'll give you all you need to know about parametrics. So Selwyn, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Shane. 25 years, that's a bit scary when you say it like that. But anyway, welcome guys to Parametrics 101. We're going to have a look at how parametrics work in AutoCAD. Hold on. AutoCAD introduced parametrics in Autodesk introduced parametrics in AutoCAD 2010. So it's been there for quite a while. With parametric tools and constraints, we use the parametric tools and constraints for testing in our design. So we may have some lines that are parallel and that need to be maintained to be parallel or right angles or something like that. And we use geometric constraints to do that sort of thing. So the association between objects is controlled by geometric constraints. And then we can constrain or control the lengths of objects, the angles of objects by using dimensional constraints. So I'm just going to show you what we're going to go through today. So the learning objectives for today is we're going to be looking at geometric constraints, which, as I said, are the associations between objects in AutoCAD. Dimensional constraints to do with setting the sizing of objects, and if the size of something changes, other objects in our drawing can also change the size when we modify those settings. Sorry, I just clicked exit by mistake there, guys. Sorry about that. Hold on. I apologize for that. While I'm locating that, I've got on screen a parametric drawing, which is fairly straightforward. Hold on, I'm just going to bring this one back up again. So we look at settings. So the settings that control what is assigned as a parametric setting when we're creating objects in our drawing, or when we're automatically constraining something, what constraints are applied to those objects. We'll also be looking at the parameter manager. The parameter manager allows us to use some formulas in our parameters, and that will allow us to work with our dimensional constraints, and we may have a formula that one object is half the length of another, or some sort of association, or can be 2 times the size of something. And we'll be looking at, when we've got a constrained drawing, how we can relax constraints so it doesn't take any notice of the constraints when we're working with the drawing. We'll also look at auto-constraining. Auto-constraining is when you are creating line work in your AutoCAD drawing, we can have some constraints set that when you place a line at a right angle to an object, it will stay as a right angle to that object, no matter whether the line moves or rotates or whatever, that right angle association will remain at all times. And finally, we'll look at display control. The display control, when we're using the constraints, generally they do not plot in AutoCAD. However, we can convert them into dimensions in AutoCAD. They're still smart enough to know the associations that they have with other objects and the scaling factors and everything that's associated with those constraints that we have in our drawing. So we may as well get straight into it. We're going to work sequentially through, I'll just change this back to normal view. So on our AutoCAD, before I go any further, AutoCAD and its vertical equivalents like Civil 3D, Architectural Desktop, all those sort of applications have full control over parametric constraints. AutoCAD LT can display the constraints. You can modify the constraints. However, you are unable to create constraints in AutoCAD LT. So as a minimum, we need the basic AutoCAD, or BricsCAD also has constraints in there as well, parametric constraints. And the parametric constraints in BricsCAD operate pretty much the same as what we have in AutoCAD. There are a few differences, but you'd be able to work out what those are as we go through. So on screen, I have a drawing that has multiple things shown on screen. You'll see we've got this icon here. And if we have a look over on the tool, on the ribbon, click on Parametric, and you'll see here we have some different items here for our geometric constraints. We also have a dimensional area, and that's for our dimensional constraints. And then we have a Manage tab, which allows us to delete constraints, and it also allows us to load up the parameters manager, and we can create formulas and things in there, as well as on screen. So if we have a look at this drawing here, this is a fully constrained drawing. You'll see that we have a entry here that says D1 equals 10. Then over here, you'll see that D1 is referred to in D3. So D3 equals D1 and scaled at half the size. So this length here will be 5 meters. This one is D1 divided by 3, and that will maintain that scaling. So if I modify this dimension here, we will find that the whole drawing will change to suit the dimensions that we've changed. So that's now become 13.83, and therefore these objects will scale. So that'll be a third of this distance, and then the size of this object here will be half of this distance here. You'll find over on the right-hand side, we have a similar thing. We have diameter set to 2, and the external diameter is the first diameter multiplied by 1.5. We can change these entries. So if I make that 3, you'll find that the outer circle has changed size also. So that's a basic constrained drawing. Okay, so we're going to work through these tools here. I've got a few things set up in our drawing, and we'll just work through the different things. So on our ribbon, we have a thing called Auto Constrain. So that's what we're going to look at the moment. Auto Constrain will apply constraints to our object that we select. You can have multiple objects. I've just got a simple rectangle in this drawing. So what I'm going to do is click on Auto Constrain, select my objects, press Enter, and you'll see that you have these items come up. If we zoom in close, we'll see this one here. If we hover over it, it says it's a perpendicular constraint. So whatever we do with this rectangle, these lines here will be perpendicular to each other. We also have an equals or parallel. Sorry, parallel and equals here. I get a bit confused with equal and parallels. So we've got a parallel constraint here. So that means that this line here will always be parallel with this opposing line over here. We also have the same here. We've got parallel and parallel with this object here. This little eyebrow sort of one ensures that this line here remains horizontal. So it's basically added this tool here, horizontal, and we've got the perpendicular, which is this tool here, and the parallel is this tool here, and perpendicular is this tool just in here. If we hover over any of these items here, we can generally get a greater description of what is available in here. So we've got parallel, horizontal, and we've got perpendicular. So if I click on the rectangle, I reduce it, you'll see that these lines remain parallel, these ones remain parallel, and this one remains horizontal. And we have the perpendicular constraint in this corner. If I try and rotate, I can't because I have the horizontal constraint applied. So if we have a constraint that is applied that we are unsure that we want, we can actually relax constraints or maintain constraints. If I maintain constraints, I won't be able to rotate. It'll just change size. We'll have a look at relaxing constraints a little bit further along. So any of these corners that I modify, we will retain the rectangular shape because of those constraints. Okay, so that's auto constrain. We can constrain horizontal and vertical. At the moment, when we select this triangle here and we move a point, you'll see that the horizontal changes. If we did the same with the vertical, we'll see that the vertical changes as well. However, what we want to do is we want to constrain this to horizontal and we want to constrain this line to vertical. So all we need to do is go over to the horizontal constraint here, click on horizontal, then click on horizontal here, and our line will stay horizontal. So when we try and move that around, you can see that that line will always stay horizontal. So now we'll apply the vertical constraint to this line here. And now when we try and change its size or angles and things like that, you'll see that the horizontal line stays horizontal and the vertical line stays vertical. You can see that it's moving around when I'm moving my cursor around. So there's also another tool here called Fix. So if I click on Fix, it will set a point to be consistent and to stay static within our drawing. So if I place that fix or lock here, you'll see that we now have a fixed point entry here on this line. And now when we try and move things around, I try and move this one, it's not going to move. So that point will stay where it is, no matter what we do with moving these along. So with that fixed point entry here, this point will stay the same. If we find we don't want that to stay horizontal, or we don't want a fixed point, we can right click on it and we can select delete, and that will delete that constraint that's applied to that line. So now I can move that around and you'll see that it's no longer fixed to that point. So I'm just stepping through each of these different ones here, and then we'll go through at the end and we'll recreate that first object that we saw on screen. So on this one, we're going to look at parallel and perpendicular. So with parallel, we have the parallel command here. So click on parallel. We want to make this line parallel with this one. So what we'll do, we select the first object. The first object that you select will always stay in position. The second object you select will align itself in whatever manner is expected with the parameter that you're adding. So being parallel, I click on this and you'll see that those lines are now parallel. If I move this around, you'll see that those lines continue to stay parallel with each other no matter what I do. So I'll add a horizontal in here, and I'm going to do a perpendicular constraint here. Because at the moment when we move this around, we'll see that it just rotates. So I'm going to put a perpendicular constraint in here. Click on perpendicular. I want to use that as the control, and that will make that one rotate. So now when I modify this one, it will always stay perpendicular. And you'll also notice while I'm doing that, if I click here, the horizontal one remains horizontal, no matter about this one here. So you'll see it just rotates and stays horizontal. If I was to remove, I'll just get out of delete horizontal, I can modify this once more. I've got an upset in my screen at the moment, it seems. Okay. So with horizontal relaxed or gone, I can modify that line however I want. However, the parallel lines will always stay parallel and the perpendicular line will stay perpendicular. Okay. So now we'll look at tangential. So what I'm going to do, I'll explode that. So I'm just going to modify that. I want this line to stay horizontal, and I also want this line to stay horizontal. We want, as we're using lines, actually I'll show you in a moment, I'm going to associate the arc to this line and make it tangential. So we have a tangent command over here. I click on tangent, choose my arc and my line to associate it with. I've got an issue with my screen. I'll do the same down here with this one here. And what I'm going to do here is click on coincident, and I'm going to make that point and that point the same. I'll do the same here. You'll see that because I exploded the polyline, it's in its actual line work now. Sorry, I chose the wrong point there. Coincident, pick the end, and then pick the other end. So that is now tangential here. If I rotate this, you'll see that the arc will always be tangential. Okay, and now I'm just going to put this point onto here. So coincident again, pick near the end of the line. There's only two snaps when we're applying a geometric constraint to our drawing. You'll see you've got the end point, midpoint, and the other end point. So if I hover over this one, I've got end point, midpoint, and end point. So what I want to keep this line where it is. So I'll choose that point there, and I want that point to snap. So we've got line work in our drawing, and it's basically almost like a polyline now. If I move this around, it moves. I can grab the arc, move that around, and you'll see that it's adjusting itself and staying tangential and doing what it needs to with the other line work. Okay, smooth is another one. So in this drawing, I've got a spline, normal spline, and I've got a line. What I want to do with the spline is I want this direction here for the line to continue. So over here, we have a button that says smooth. So I'll click on smooth. I'll choose my spline at the end that I want it to attach to, and the other end here. And now when I move this around, the spline and the line stay in line with each other. If I move this point here, you'll see that the spline and the line have an association with each other that will be obeyed at all times unless you relax the constraint. You can do spline to spline, spline to arc, or any objects in your drawing that have an arc in them to smooth them so they continue on. And it basically makes that line tangential to the spline, the end of the spline. Coincident is another one, which is up here. Hold on, I'm just going to find coincident. So I can always associate this circle, say, with the center of, or the midpoint of this line here. So if I click on coincident, I want this line to stay where it is, and I want the circle to move. So when I move this around, that circle will always stay in the center of that point. So we can apply any other constraints that we want to, set it back to a rectangle. And no matter what we do with this, that circle will stay central to that line. I could have another circle. I'll do coincident again, pick that point, this one here, and then whenever we move this point around, that object will stay attached to that corner and the white circle will stay in the center. Okay, concentric. Basically, when you've got arcs or curves or circles, it will place the circles concentric to each other. The concentric tool is located up here. If we just click on that one, we want the smaller circle to stay where it is. So remember, the first object you select is the object that stays in position, and the other object will move. So we have the concentric object or tab here, show that they're concentric. So when I move one, or sorry, if I move the object, I click one, I'll move that, and you'll see that that circle will always stay attached to the center of that circle. Okay, so this one, we're going to have a look at a couple of different things in here. I'm just going to stretch this one down a little bit. And I'll just go off center. So in here, I want it to stay horizontal here. So I'm going to click on horizontal for these. And here, I want this one to stay horizontal, this one to stay horizontal. And we'll go parallel for these two. And we'll go parallel for these two. So we want these to be the same length. We could go equal, choose this one and choose this line here, and that will adjust that one. However, we can also come up here and use collinear. So collinear will align the objects similar to what we did with that equal length. So I'll click on collinear. I'll choose the object that I want to stay in position, and then I'll choose the second object that I want to be in line with that. So you'll see that that's now moved to the same horizontal position as the other side. So when I move these around, you'll see that we have bit of a dodgy drafting. We want it to stay as right angles, so we'll put a right angle down here. Now when we move that one around, you'll see that we can't change that angle. It just changes shape. However, these ones here will do the same thing. So we'll put a perpendicular, a perpendicular in here as well. And that will control the shape of this. So it will stay with the vertical and horizontal lines. Okay. And what we're going to do now is we're going to fix the midpoint here. I'm just going to move this one. So I'll move this one over onto the midpoint. And we're going to have a look at the Symmetrical Tool. So I want to fix this point here. So I'll click on the Fix here. Select the center. So this point will stay the same no matter what I do. So I'm working on one side and it's not adjusting the other side. So, but we want both sides to be identical. So we have the Symmetrical Tool here, or Symmetric. So what we're going to do here is click on Symmetric. We want that one to be the first part of our symmetry, the second part, and what we're going to use as the mirror point for our symmetry. So if we click on that, we'll find that when we modify this one now, those lines will stay at the same offset from that center line that we just chose. We might want these ones to stay equal. So we've got the size of this one, and we want that one to be the same. So now when we tweak this, those points will stay the same. And then when we move this in, they'll stay the same. Okay, so here we have what we call constraint bars. So the constraint bars show us everything that is associated with a particular line. You'll find that they're located central on the object that they're associated with. We can right click and we can delete a constraint if we like. We can hide a constraint so it disappears on screen, off screen, sorry. We can right click, we can hide all constraints, or we can have a look at constraint bar settings. Another one up here, we've got geometric constraints. We've only worked with geometry at the moment, so we'll have a look. We can show all constraints. Sorry, show all shows all constraints, hide all hides all the constraints. We also have up here, if we have a look at, there's a little arrow just here, and this will get us into our settings for our geometric constraints. Same with the dimensional constraints. We have that little arrow there, and that will get us into our dimensional constraints. We'll have a look at those settings shortly. We're just going to go over to the next one. We've got dimensions in our drawing, and when we move things around, we find that the drawing doesn't really do much. The items just update with the dimensions that are there. However, we have here a thing called convert, and that will convert normal AutoCAD dimensions into parametrics or parametric dimensions. So if I click on convert, select the dimensions, and you'll see that they now come up to this image here. You'll see here that they have D something signifying dimension. So dimension 10, 9, 11, 12. We've got the size of this one. The dimension equals 2. If we have a look at the parameters manager, which is up here, we'll find in here that we have all all the parameters that are used in this drawing. So if we have a look at the D10, find D10 in here, the entry is 2. Here, I can change it to whatever I want. So I might make it to 3, and you'll see that it updates on screen. We can also come in here, double click, and we want that to be 10, and we just type 10, and that will update there. And it will also, it should update here once I get out of the command. So you can drive your dimension sizes from in here by double clicking, or over here by modifying these entries. You'll find parameters, be it dimensional parameters or geometric parameters, do not print. There is a way of showing them or getting them to print, and we'll go through that one a little bit later. However, we're just going to have a look at, we'll go back to our rectangle and we'll look at relieving or removing constraints. So I've back to this rectangle before, which was fully constrained. So we've got parallel, and we've got parallel. If I click on a group here, press Shift, I'm able to relax the parameter. However, when we relax the parameter also goes. So all that's done, it's removed the parameters that were applicable. So it's removed the parallel and the parallel for these two here. So just be aware when you release or ease constraints that it will probably remove some of the parameters because they won't be applicable anymore for that object. Okay. So we're going to have a look at constraint settings at the moment. But before we do that, we're just going to have a look. There's an icon that we can have down here called Infer Constraints. So up here, we right click on the little hamburger type thing down here, click on Infer Constraints, and that will bring up this window here. You'll see the shape of the object here. And if we hover over an object here, we'll see there was a constraint. There's a constraint here. You can see that little symbol that looks similar to this one here. That merely signifies there's a constraint applied to that object. So that's one object. So it's just showing you that there's constraints applied to that one. If I come over here where nothing has been done, you'll see that there's no display of that small icon that we're seeing here. That icon will display whether that's shown or not. At the moment, I have Infer Constraints turned off. Infer Constraints is for when you're drawing, so we'll have a look at that shortly. However, we'll go back here to the settings. So we'll have a look at geometric constraints. We click on this little button here, and it brings up the constraints available for geometric constraints. So when we're adding constraints, or when we did the auto constrain before, it went through each of these different constraints to evaluate whether they were applicable for the object we were using or not. So you might find that you don't want to include certain constraints in your selections and things like that. So just come in here and turn them off. We have Constraint Bar Transparency, which is when we come back over here. I've got them set quite high at the moment, just so they stand out on screen. But if I come back to, say, 26 or something like that, you'll find that they'll fade until you hover over them, and then they become full strength visually. So I'll just set that one back, just so it's easier during the session to be able to see what's going on. Show constraint bars after applying constraints to selected objects is what is happening here. When I apply a constraint, it's showing what the constraints are. If we have the constraints turned off, we can get it to show the constraint bars when objects are selected. So you might have the display turned off, but when you select a line, it will show you what constraints are associated with that line. We can also go to dimensional and auto constrain while we're here. However, you will notice that when I clicked on the geometric one, it goes to the geometric tab. If I click on the dimensional entry here, it goes to the dimensional tab. If I go over to just on this one here, we'll go back into the dimensional, and you'll see here on the display format, we've got name and expression. So what it's going to do there, it's going to show the name, which in this situation is D11, equals whatever the expression is. The expression is just a real number, so D equals 10 meters. We could also change it to only show the name. If I click on here, it only shows the actual codes for the dimensions. When I come back in here and I change it to value and OK, it's showing me the value of the parametric dimensions that are in my drawing. Okay, so show lock icon is basically that. If you don't want it to show up, you can turn it off. However, it's handy to know that it's actually a design constraint. And you can show hidden dynamic constraints for selected objects. If you don't show the hidden dynamic constraints, you may be in issues with corresponding constraints that may be there. So I'd recommend leaving that one on at all times. Auto constrain is when we come into a drawing and we use the auto constrain button, what items are going to be used for constraining. So it's going to do everything in my situation. I can remove certain ones if I want. However, for this demonstration, I'm just going to leave everything checked there. If you recall before, when I did the tangent that wasn't attached to that line, it moved, whereas you might want that the tangent objects must always share an intersection point with another object. When you have that checked, you'll find that the tangent won't adjust itself to the line, so you probably need this one unchecked. And same with perpendicular objects. They must intersect if you're going to apply the perpendicular constraint. There are tolerances that are allowed, so it may not quite touch, but I've got a tolerance of 0.05 meters, which is quite a lot because I'm working in meters at the moment, and 1 degree variance if I'm doing perpendicular or any of the other ones that need angles. Okay. While I'm in there, you can also change the sequence of our constraints. You can move them up, move them down, reposition them, whatever sequence you would like them to be in. If we come down and have a look at the status bar, we can right click on there and we have Infer Constraints settings. And that will bring up that same dialog box for you. Okay. So we're going to have a look at, move on to dimensions. We had a little look at dimensions just here, converting dimensions using the convert button that's here. What we're going to do here is we're going to constrain this drawing. I'm going to auto constrain this one here. Hold on, I'll make those a bit brighter just so they stand out. So auto constraining, it's put a perpendicular, it's put a parallel and a parallel. It's ignored the circle for whatever reason that may be. However, I'm going to add a couple of constraints, dimensional constraints. I'm just going to check a distance here, which is 10. So I want it to stay horizontal with horizontal and vertical lines. So what I'm going to do is just use linear. Same with normal dimensions. If you click and start selecting, you have to select both points and then position. However, same with dimensions. If we start the command, press enter, we can select the entire object. So vertically, I'm going 10, horizontally, sorry, it's 5. So these are just dimensions at the moment, or parametric dimensions. What we're going to do is we're going to position this at half the distance up here and halfway across. I might actually move it off a little bit so you can see what's going on. Sorry. Got there eventually. I just had the snaps on. I should have turned them off to start with. But anyway, so I'm going to reposition this circle in here. You'll find that when we modify this, we're stuck with what we've got because we have these dimensions up here. If we want to change the size of our object, we need to actually highlight the dimension and grab a grip and modify it, or double click in here and change the size. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and set that to 10. Now I'm going to dimension this circle from this bottom corner. So I'll go linear once more. I'll pick the center of the circle and I'll pick this corner here. And I want it to be out this way. I'll need to change my display just to see what my parameters are. So I'll just come in here and I'm going to put name and expression, just so I can see what's going on. So I'm looking at D13 and I want D15 to be half the length of D13. So I can click in here and I can just type D13 divided by 2. And you'll see that now that's positioned halfway along that line. I'll do the same thing with this one up here. I'll go linear. I'll choose the circle once more, pick that point, go up here, and this one is D16. I could come over to D16 over here, or I could double click here. So D16 over here will be D14, which is this horizontal one just here, D14 divided by 2. Okay, so no matter what I do now, it will be centered. So I can change this one, D13, I'll change its size to 20 and it stays centered. I'll change D14 to 10 and that circle still stays centered. So I can't move this circle elsewhere in this object. It'll always stay in the center of it, no matter what. And I can't scale my drawing. I have to modify it using either the parameters manager or by double clicking on the object. However, when you're modifying these ones that are using formulas, it's using D14. So if you want to modify that one, we'd come in here and we'd change that. There's no need to retype any of the entries in there. I can just type 10 and it knows that D13 will now equal 10. Okay, Infer Constraints. When you're drawing in AutoCAD, you may want, when you've got perpendicular objects or parallel objects, for them to automatically be constrained. So I'll draw some lines, and you'll see that when I go horizontal, vertical, any of these sort of ones, I can come in here and I can move things around. However, if we use Infer Constraints, so we just click on this button and it turns blue. Now when I do my lines, I'll go up, I'll go vertical, I'll go horizontal, and you'll see that it's put a vertical constraint and a a perpendicular constraint. So when it meets any of the conditions that are set in the constraint bar, it will add those constraints to our drawing. If you want to stop using it, just keep going and you'll find that now no more constraints will be added. When we move this around, we should find that our right angles stay in place. Same with these ones up here. And we'll find that we can't change that angle because we've got vertical and we've got that perpendicular constraint applied. You'll see also, as we were drawing lines, it's put these small blue icons in here. That's your coincident parameter or constraint. So because I drew lines, it's putting coincident on each of them. If I did polylines, it doesn't need to do the constraint. I'll turn that back on. So there's no coincident point here. So you're drawing lines, so it's almost like it becomes a polyline in some respects, because that line is associated with all the other objects that are being constrained using the AutoCAD tool. Okay, so we've pretty much covered all of those ones. We're going to have a look at a couple of these items in here. So we're just going to have a look at this object here. We're going to auto-constrain this one, select the whole thing, and it's gone through and it's constrained wherever it can. So I want this line, I don't want that one, delete. So I want this line and this line to be the same length. I'm going to add a tangential entry there. I'll make these coincident. So I'm just showing you some of the tools that we've got. We want this to be in the center of this circle. So we'll pick the outer because we want that to stay where it is. So that's staying in the center. We've got horizontal here. We might make these ones parallel. Parallel and parallel. And we'll make this one over here vertical. Okay, so I'm just going to add a linear constraint to this here. And we'll make that 2, so that length changes. We'll also add an aligned constraint here. And we'll make that D17, which is that last constraint we added, and we'll make it half the length. So divided by 2. Just move that out of the way. So when I move this one, and my screen's not updating. So we've got this object and it's going to stay like that no matter what we do with it. We probably need to relax some of the constraints. So if we want to move this point here, we can click on this point, hold Shift, and it removes the coincident constraint and the other one, the vertical. So just a quick one. If you recall, we had a look at this entry just here. I'll just quickly show you how to do the same thing on this drawing here. I think we have time just to knock it out. So I'll go linear. I've lost my cursor. And I'll make that 10. linear again, I'll go from this. I don't know why I've lost my cursor. See if that appears. Okay, no. You got any questions you're stuck with, Shane? While
Look, there's just one interesting question about the dimension names. I think that's the question of whether they can be changed. Instead of it saying D19, it says something else.
Yep. If so, hold on. I'll go back to here. D17. If I go to D17, I can click in here, and I can call that overall length.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, they can have meaningful names to the end user on what they're controlling that way. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry, I missed that one. So yeah, you can have any name in here. The only thing is it cannot start with a number and it cannot have spaces in the name. So like D18 here, if we change the name here, you'll see that wherever it's used, overall length here has been replaced here. So before it was D18 or D19, and now it's become overall length divided by 2. For printing, I'll just go back to this first object. So if I was to print this, window, we've actually converted them. So here, if we bring up properties, so we've got a rotated dimension here. Here, if we change it to dynamic, it will show the dynamic constraint, but then when we go to print, we'll go previous, I'll just choose that area there. That dimension is missing. So if you're going to print your parameters that you have in your drawing, you need to change them to annotational dimensions. So you can come through and select all like-minded dimensions. So over in this one here, if I grab these ones here, select, change it to annotational, they will now print. However, you'll recall that we're showing D, whatever it may be. So what we're going to do is go dimensional, and we'll just display the value. And that would be what you will print out. The padlocks won't print. And you'll be able to just print that drawing as it is, like that. Anything else, Shane?
No, there's no other questions that have come in yet for us to bite over. So that's
okay,
good.
That's good. So I'll just continue to go to that point, and if you recall earlier, that one was, I can't see the code now. And yeah, so that should be D19 by 3, which gives it that point. And now we'll do this one. that out there, and we'll call that D19 equals, sorry, D19 divided by 2, which will make that half the size of that. We'll add some horizontals here and verticals here. So no matter what the size of this one here, if we change the size of this, we'll find that that square is going to be moving to those positions that we have. So it's a third of the distance, the overall distance, and then half the distance for this sizing in here. Deleting constraints, it's fairly straightforward. You can right click on a constraint and delete, and you've got your show all and hide all. So I'm just going to add a diameter to this one here. So the diameter is 2. I'm going to add a diameter to this one here. However, that's going to be dia 3 times 1.5. And then we can constrain that center of that to that point there. And we'll make that 2.5. So that was wrong. Center of that one. And we'll make that one 2.5. We'll do the same over here, aligned center to that one, 2.5. So that will always do 2.5 from that corner. We might want to go from the midpoint of here to position that there. And that can be, we'll use D19, which is the overall vertical, divided by 2. Right, divided by, and we'll go -1, just so it's 1 unit shorter. And now we find that, I was just stuffed up with that one. And I didn't do a concentric. Okay. So now when we move that around, I didn't constrain that rectangle, but you'll see that that circle is staying in the right place. And if we want to change positioning, we just go up and down, and that will modify those ones for you. And I think that's about it, Shane. Is there anything else that you feel that I need to cover?
Thank you, Selwyn. That was great. No, look, the only other thing probably is just to turn on the AutoCAD properties panel, just so users can see that, that you've got the parameters manager to edit. You can double click to edit, but also the AutoCAD properties panel will let you type in and make those similar changes to name and expression.
Yeah. So yeah, you can change it here. So if I go 5, those 2 entries will change to 5. So it's now 5 units from the corner. And you've also got in here your annotational. So the annotational dimensions will plot, these ones won't. So just remember when you go to plot that if it looks like this, with the padlocks and stuff, and it doesn't plot, just go through and change them to annotational. If you don't want the parameters to plot, fine, just leave them as parameters, and none of those things will plot. So what would come out would be, if I hide all, these are the only ones that are going to plot because they've been converted into annotational dimensions.
Terrific.
Okay. So you still have the control, you know, everything's still there. So if you modify the sizing and stuff like that, it's still going to be a smart drawing, but it just doesn't show any of the tools. But when you select, you'll have those tools back. And that will disappear.
Great. Thank you, Selwyn. So if anybody had any other questions, you might want to poke them in now so that we can answer, but I think we've pretty much answered what's come in, Selwyn. So look, I'll round out. Thank you very much for that presentation. I don't know about everybody else, but I found that very enlightening, and I have used parametrics before. So thank you from myself. Certainly there was some real tips and tricks and some areas that I hadn't explored. So thank you, Selwyn. I hope everybody really enjoyed that session. I certainly did. So I hope everybody got a lot out of that. No other questions have dropped in, so I'll sort of round us out. Look, thank you everybody for attending. As per usual, what we will do is push this recording up to YouTube. So the YouTube address is shown there, and just down here actually. Well, there's there, and you can go to this webcast page to put yourself in for the next few sessions. Just so you can see, these are the sessions for September. So Parametrics has just been delivered magnificently by Selwyn. Next week we have Corridors 101, which is really a repeat because we had issues with the last recording. There's a session on Model Viewer tips and tricks coming up, and then Selwyn, I think you'll be taking AutoCAD Fields.
Yes, that's me.
101. It's another very exciting topic for AutoCAD users wanting to automate text information with actual properties. So look, thank you again, Selwyn, for the session. Hope everybody really enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone,
Selwyn.
for attending, and thank you, Shane, for being my offsider. Appreciate it, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Cheers.